Inconclusive. Those were the findings of a months-long investigation into how racist photos got on Governor Ralph Northam's medical school yearbook page.
The results were announced this morning during a news conference in Norfolk. 10 News reporter Shane Dwyer was there and has since traveled to Richmond in hopes of talking with the governor.
And he joins us now live from our Commonwealth's capital. So, Shane, you didn't speak to Northam, but you did talk to members of the NAACP. What did they have to say?
Lindsay and Brittany, we spoke with a ranking member of the NAACP who was in Norfolk with us this morning and other members of the media for that media briefing, and he says he was offended with what happened this morning. Now, Governor Ralph Northam not having any on-camera availability with any of the media members today, instead releasing a brief statement in response to this report that was published this morning. Now, many people that have read this, including folks from the NAACP, are now calling into question the entire integrity of the report.
We are a public institution. We receive public funds. We're an institution of higher education. I decided that we did not want to enter any opportunity to have that photo enter the press or provide a political process.
That's how Eastern Virginia Medical School President Dr. Richard Homan defends not speaking up after knowing for years about this racist image on Governor Ralph Northam's yearbook page. The fact that he knew and didn't say anything was one of the controversial findings announced Wednesday after a months-long investigation.
So the president tried to find something and he came up with this investigation with McGuire Woods. So this is more of a trying to heal a reputation as opposed to trying to get to the bottom of it.
James Boyd of the Portsmouth NAACP interjected in the news conference, saying it feels more like a cover-up than an investigation. McGuire Woods, the law firm hired by the school, defended their work.
So I assure you that from our standpoint, from a professional standpoint, this was an independent investigation, objective in every respect, and that we had the full support of the university in terms of their commitment to being transparent.
The investigation could not determine who the people in the picture are or how it got there. After its release, Governor Ralph Northam said in a statement he cooperated with the investigation and that he affirmed he is not in the racist photo. Many, including the governor himself, had hoped this investigation would answer all the questions, but many have been left blank.
I think that was more of a PR campaign. It sounded like the investigators were Ralph Northam's attorneys as opposed to trying to get to the bottom of what happened, so extremely disappointed today.
McGuire Woods, the law firm that completed this investigation, is a powerhouse law firm here in Richmond. It's worth noting that they donated about $25,000 to Northam's gubernatorial campaign. They also donated about $25,000 to Northam's Political Action Committee, and that's among many other donations that they've made here in Richmond. Live in Richmond, Shane Dwyer, 10 News, working for you.